We just wanted to open by giving some introductions. The focus of the webinar is on recent discipline changes under 1541 and what it means for Washington schools, students, and families. I'm Carrie Bassis. I'm the director of the Office of the Education Ombuds under the Governor's Office, and I'm joined by my colleague Rose, who will present soon. I just wanted to do a quick introduction of our speakers. Dr. John Glennewinkle, Superintendent of Republic and Curlew School Districts. Wyeth Jesse, Chief of Student Supports for Seattle Schools. Aaron Romanek, Manager of the Truancy Office at Seattle Schools. Karen Pillar, Staff Attorney at Team Child. And Joshua Lynch, Supervisor of Student Discipline for OSPI. Great.
This is Rose Spidel with the Education Ombuds Office, and I'm going to do a brief overview of the kind of changes that we're seeing with 1541. Some of the things around discipline will be the same as they always have been. Students and parents will have the right to get notice about what the rules are, and then if a student has broken them, and then have an opportunity to challenge the proposed discipline. Also, one of the things that will stay the same that was added a couple years ago is the re-engagement meetings, where schools must invite families in with a student if a student has been removed for more than 10 days, so that together they can work to build a plan to support successful re-engagement with school. Some big changes that have come out, and these are just the highlights. One, there are new time limits on expulsions. Now they will be limited to no more than one academic term, a term that will be defined by districts. There are new limits on the reasons that students can be suspended or expelled. There now are limits on the use of suspension or expulsion may no longer be used as a form of discretionary discipline. And there is a specific list from the statute about the offenses that are not discretionary and therefore may still be ones that warrant suspension or expulsion. There's a requirement now that districts must provide access to educational services during suspension or expulsion for any student, and those services need to be appropriate, comparable, and equitable. And the re-engagement meetings must be culturally responsive and relevant. There are also requirements for districts to review their policies in consultation with communities, families, staff, and students. And we'll move right on into next summary from Josh Lynch at OSPI.
Great. So as Rose mentioned, we have Joshua Lynch, who's the Program Supervisor for Discipline and Behavior at OSPI.
Good morning. This is Josh Lynch. I'm just going to reiterate and go through some of the things that Rose just presented. Obviously, we're talking about part one of this bill called 1541. The entirety of the bill was actually initially introduced in 2013. It's a summary of the recommendations from the Educational Opportunity Gap Oversight and Accountability Committee. So obviously one of their concerns was the disproportionate rates at which students of color were represented in discipline in Washington. Hence the name and title of the part of the bill we're talking about. So here's a list of the major components, of which Rose just went over a few. I do want to clarify that with the discretionary discipline, what the legislature did is define categories of violations for which long-term suspension and expulsions can no longer be used. And anything that fell outside of those categories would be considered discretionary discipline, for which short-term could still be used, but not long-term or expulsion. The other major component is that school districts may not suspend the provision of educational services as a disciplinary action. OSPI, in responding to the provisions of this law, which went into effect June 9th, 2016, has released a couple bulletins that provide a little bit more language around how OSPI is currently interpreting these provisions of the law, and those can be found through OSPI's website. easiest to access through the student discipline page on OSPI's website, which you can find through the search bar. So, since this law passed, OSPI, which already has several initiatives going on around equity and student discipline, has come up with an implementation plan to look at revising the discipline laws, the rules related to student discipline in Chapter 392-400 WAC. This slide here gives you a timeline of how we're approaching this. So part of that is reconvening the Student Discipline Task Force that originally convened following the passage of 5946 bill in 2013. So that Discipline Task Force, we just had our first meeting yesterday. That's going to align with the rulemaking process we're engaging in, and then out of that will come discipline training modules that will align with the new rules and CEDARs, etc. These are the provisions in the law that speak to the discipline training modules. Districts won't be mandated to implement the trainings, but they will be strongly encouraged to. And the modules will be available online and to be used in a self-directed manner. And they will be a great resource, we're hoping, for districts that will take the initiative to use them with their staff. Next slide, please. So there's several components related to family engagement throughout the bill. Rose mentioned that with discipline policies and reviewing discipline policies, monitoring data, etc., that families in the community should be involved in that process. And so the impact of this bill on the state for students, families, there's a huge potential to improve student outcomes and to really address the opportunity gap that exists in Washington through these new policies. And we have, as an agency, have encouraged districts to involve families from the get-go with coming up with policies to implement this bill.
Great. Thank you so much, Josh. And so now we're going to transition into our panel portion of the presentation. And so for that, we'll be spending about 35 minutes where our panelists will focus on some of these questions. So what are you most excited about with changes? What would you like to share? Where do you think the greatest challenges will be in having these changes translate into practice? Really thinking about decreased removals, disproportionality, improvement in school learning climate, and what kind of resources from each of their perspectives they think they could use from communities, families, students, and other sources of support. So we're going to start the presentation with John Glennewinkle from Curlew and Republic School Districts. John?
Thank you, Carrie. My name is John Glennewinkle. I'm currently the superintendent in the Republic and Curlew School Districts. And I am actually quite excited about this whole change in sort of a paradigm shift around the purpose of discipline. What we need to understand is that discipline is about making school a safe and welcoming place. It's about creating an environment where all students are welcome, but it is not punishment. So if we use discipline, which is a way to change behavior, to create a culture that is understood by students, staff, and community, then we will create improved student outcomes. This is a very fine line in many ways, and a shift in the way that schools, families, and communities indeed think about the actions we take to allow students to be successful. Next slide, please.
Do you want me to forward one more?
Yep, one more.
Okay,
I don't have,
thanks.
it's not up on the screen there. What's my title right now?
Oh, I was on discipline policy.
And now,
Okay.
And now we're on good
So
discipline.
that's right there, discipline policy, but I'm not seeing it on my screen.
Okay.
So this has already been mentioned, but what I'd like to talk about for just a moment is that this discipline policy really needs to be individualized to the extent possible. One size fits all mode of discipline is no longer workable or fits in our society. We have to make sure that we're looking at what is it that's causing the behavior. When we see a discipline issue that is manifesting itself, oftenly that's a secondary behavior based upon some other issue that is causing the child to act out. That could be an issue with reading or with math. It could, or in other words, an academic issue. It could be a home and family life. It could be just having basic needs met. One of the things that I would strongly suggest is that as we look at these policies, we work hard to connect students to the larger community. And we can do this in a variety of ways. We can do this through community, in the cases of truancy, through community truancy boards. We can use the same policy if it's done in a very thoughtful manner to connect students who may be behind academically or students who have given up hope and therefore acting out possibly behaviorally. We can use community boards to come forward and establish opportunities for students to make repairs, to recoup credits, and to basically become a more engaged part of the community. This discipline change, the policy change, really provides us an excuse to do some work that might be before have been kind of difficult, because now we say, well, we still have these kids, and so let's figure out how to engage our community. Let's figure out how to keep everybody in this child's life, and let's see how we can set up a system, a re-engagement system for success, rather than saying, well, we'll push the kid out for a year or whatever that takes, and we're not going to have to worry about that anymore. And most of this was covered, I think, in Rose and Josh's, the next slide, but most of this was covered in Rose and Josh's statement. The guidelines on discipline need to be published. These are just good practices in the handbooks. The rules need to be reasonably aligned and with the current RCW WACs, and they need to be understandable. Rules should be age appropriate, and rules that cannot be adjusted to be sensitive to cultural issues, gender issues, or social emotional factors need to be revisited. We can't have rules that ask Native American boys to cut their hair. We can't have rules that that are based in some arbitrary system that doesn't take into effect or consideration all of the other factors that our kids bring to the schoolhouse door, including their cultural and social backgrounds. The next slide I have is simply a chart. It's an update of HB 1541 that shows when new provisions will go in and the required actions for that. And basically, it's hard to read, and so I'm not going to go into detail with that. Just know that it's available. It'll be available at this website, and at Kutik Rock, who developed it. And the next slide shows what I believe to be the main changes for this, or the main changes under this. So what's happening now is we're strongly encouraging the use of professional development training regarding cultural competence to train student or school staff. And we can use LAP funds for the development of partnerships with community-based organizations for at-risk students. And this is a change from the current law where OSPI has a set of approved providers, and organization partners, but now local school boards can set up a plan and use those funds as long as that's approved in an open public meeting and that the plan is monitored to see that it's successful. So that's all I had.
That sounds great. So we're going to move on to. Oops, what happened? We're missing here. We just realized that we have a technical issue here, so if you give me 1 second, I want to see if I can get Seattle's slides up. Our PowerPoint loaded an old version, but in 1 minute, I'm going to unmute Aaron and Wyeth from Seattle. I apologize, and we're going to try to switch out the slides, so hang on there.
I thought we were next. They have the wrong person.
Thanks everyone for your patience. We're just correcting our technical error here and bringing up Seattle slides. And our next guest will be Aaron and Wyeth from the Seattle Public Schools. And here we go. We think we're getting you to their slides that they prepared for us today. Thanks for your patience. There we go. All right.
May I unmute them?
We'll unmute Aaron and Wyeth, and
sorry about
we'll
that,
ask
Aaron
you
and
to
Wyeth.
take it away for us. Thank you.
Great. Here in Seattle Public Schools are really just working on the foundation of school discipline policy. And I'm going to take it from a broader standpoint, and Aaron's going to take it to a more refined, detailed level as we think about the operational implications out in the schools. And so when we're thinking about recentering people's mindset and the culture here in Seattle, really trying to come from a positive behavioral intervention support framework that fits within our MTSS structures. And so how do we think about addressing students? And we really want to come at this work of saying, hey, the behavior is an opportunity for us to understand how students are communicating, and it's for an opportunity for us to have a teaching moment. And so how do we build that culture is you walk into a school and you know that you can get that feel of when it is sense of where, hey, I'm in it with you as a student and as families and parents and guardians to work with you in supporting the child, the whole child. We also think about our intentionality of how we support each of their students and their uniqueness. We have a number of initiatives that include also identity safety. We think about also for them about LGBTQ, how do they have groups, and then how do we utilize our resources, including counselors or family support workers or some of our contracting with mental health agencies, is to think about how can I support the student to be a positive member as opposed to a reactive member where the things that we had here and how we had processes as well as language that was really more punitive in nature. And Aaron will speak more about some of our changes here and just how we do that. Speaking of language, we want to make sure that each of our schools have behavioral expectations posted, taught, supported, and rewarded so that we're really thinking about the strengths of students as opposed to deficits. And again, these are things that we're thinking about here in Seattle because we want to get ahead of it. You can create discipline policies. You can create a lot of things of where we try to minimize the student's impact from being outside of the classroom in a more traditional disciplinary approach. But we're really thinking about, again, building culture, the relationships that are so essential, and just how you even talk. And that makes a difference. And we've noticed that in some of our outlier schools that have had tremendous decrease in discipline. And then I'll just even throw in there also attendance. Then a couple more here is this inclusivity of our students and families, teachers, administrators. Schools are the center of our community. They move in past tolerance to move towards understanding and established relationships. So when we're working with our students, even if they are performing behaviors that are unwanted, we really think about, oh, well, I can reach out to the parent or guardian to get a further understanding. Maybe something's going on at home. Maybe I can work through a timeline, kind of like a life-based crisis intervention model. So how do I timeline this? Maybe we didn't get breakfast. A lot of our students' basic needs are not being met, whether that's food, their own physical health, which could also include sleep. And so we really want to be aware of that, because why does a student have to get punished when the basic needs aren't being met? And then our aim to reduce the loss of instructional time. That's the center of our work here. I really want to help prepare students to be citizens. And so our belief is shifting from a traditional disciplinary model to one where we're, again, looking at behavior as an opportunity to teach and learn with the student, to learn more about them, work together, and making sure that they can sustain in class as much as possible. We're also thinking about moving away from the escalation and discipline to really our policies are in place to think about escalation and support. So what do we need to do to tier our supports within a PBS or MTSS structure to ensure that a student's needs may heighten, whether again that's basic needs or counseling or mental health support, that we have those systems already set up to ensure that we are trying to meet the whole child's needs, as opposed to, again, a more responsive standpoint and using discipline to try to reform behavior.
Great. This is Erin Romanek. If we could flip to the next slide, please. So what we ended up doing at the between the winter and the spring of last school year is we did an overhaul of our Student Rights and Responsibilities Handbook. So we knew as a district that we wanted to move in a different direction. And so we focused in on positive beliefs, positive relationships, positive learning, and positive partnerships within Seattle Public Schools. So that's kind of the framework. Great, you'll see the picture of it in a minute. But that was the framework that we went out to do last year. We ended up going and getting student voice. We ended up at 2 high schools and had students really provide their feedback and information to us regarding our Student Rights and Responsibilities document. We recognized that this wasn't a document that was easily readable, and we had students who had never seen this document before, so we knew it was important to incorporate their voice. And out of that, we ended up getting a lot of information from them about their own responsibilities that they wanted to see added. They wanted to see school responsibilities added as well. But most often, students really just wanted to make sure that people were there for them, and that they had someone that they could connect to at school, and that they had an adult that they could go to for not just academic needs, but for all needs. And so we really took that to heart last year, and we embedded that into our document, knowing that that's where we wanted to go anyways as a district, and our students just kind of mirrored what we were thinking, which was great. So that was done. We also did some extensive community engagement last year with this document as well. We had our Equity and Race Advisory Committee. We had the City of Seattle Race and Social Justice Community Roundtable Committee, also the Minority Engagement and Disproportionality Reduction Advisory Committee. So we wanted to make sure we were including a lot of community voice in this, as well as our own stakeholders within our own district, including administrators and different departments. So that document was approved by our board once we went in front in June, and then we came back again in September once the state law came out on June 9th. With that, we also created a student rights basic rules flyer that gets printed and sent out to all of our students in their first day packet. So we do print about 54,000 copies to make sure that every student has one and can take one home, and that is in alignment with the student rights and responsibilities. And in addition, we translate both documents into 8 different languages and have them available for families to make sure it's accessible to as many people and community members as possible. In addition, we have school and student responsibility posters that come directly from this document and all the input. They are displayed in each school this year, and so you'll get a picture of that in a minute just to show you what that looks like. But again, wanting some alignment across our schools and wanting to also make sure that, again, the expectations are there, they're very clear, and that they're similar. So if we have students that transition from school to school, that they'll understand what expectations are, which helps minimize, again, behavioral concerns that might come up if not knowing the expectations within a building. In addition, we also did a professional development district-wide this year for all of our staff that focused on relationships and resiliency. And so this was a 3 to 4 hour training that was held before school started that every staff member got, again, that layered in all of this work. There was vignettes and videos regarding the student rights and responsibilities work as well. So if you flip to the next slide, you can see just an overview. We also incorporated pictures of our own students as well. We thought that it was very important to include the student pictures and who was representative of the work that we did last year. And if you keep going to the next slide, you'll see these are just pictures of the posters that we had made. So if you walk into any Seattle Public School, you will see these posters. Many schools already have taken these posters and made them smaller versions. They've had them translated into different languages, and they're posted up and around buildings. So again, just kind of some alignment and wanting to make sure that everyone in kind of thinking about discipline, that we all kind of just understand what's expected of us, both as adults and as students within Seattle Public Schools.
Great, thank you so much for that. I'm going to go ahead and get Karen Pillar's slides set up. So Karen Pillar from Team Child is joining us for the last part of this panel. Karen?
Yes, I'm here. Thanks so much. I appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit about the changes in the school discipline rules and how from Team Child. Team Child is a free legal services office that represents people 12 to 18 years old in civil or non-criminal legal matters. And many of our clients come to us with questions and concerns about their ability to access school, especially related to having disciplinary experiences. So we've had 20 years of experience in Washington State trying to help young people navigate their way back into the school system when they're experiencing discipline. The changes that came this year with the school discipline we're really excited about. One of the first things I wanted to say about the changes, and I so appreciate what everyone else has said so far on the panel about the changes and about what schools are doing to kind of honor and implement the changes, is that we see the things that have changed in school discipline to be really aligned with the work we've been trying to do for quite a while, which is really to shift how adults think about and respond to student behavior. And Wyatt and Aaron, talked a lot about that from Seattle School District's perspective, as did John, really thinking about what's going on with a young person and seeing behavior as a form of communication and responding to it that way, and how different that is for our clients and their families than responding to behavior with the assumption that that behavior is intentionally bad and having the only response be punishment. So we're really excited. These changes to us seem really important and hopefully just a piece of a longer journey in really rethinking what the experiences are for young people in public schools. For us at Team Child, we'd like to, another change in the law that we really are championing and would like to see it further developed over the years is really trying to disconnect student behavior with their ability to access education. So, for us, one of the biggest problems we ever saw in school discipline is the way discipline policy has developed nationally not just in Washington State, which is that kids go to school, public school. Every student has a right to go to public school. The doors are open to all, except if you behave in a certain way, then you're no longer welcome in public school. And to us, that seems like a real disconnect, especially based on everything we're learning about child development, about how trauma affects children, about brain development, about adolescent brain development in particular, where, a lot of behavior is pretty normal and pretty typical and really quite appropriate. And so then when you say that behavior now has to be punished and you can't get educated because of it, creates a real problem. So we see these changes as being super positive. The fact that even if you are removed from your school setting due to some sort of disciplinary action, the school district has to continue to provide you with educational services, to us is aligned with this idea that really your behavior and your ability to access education should be two totally different things. You're going to have behavior, the school's going to need to address that and support you in some way, but your education will never be disrupted. So we're really happy about that. And if we could keep moving forward in that, the one place we would focus on is that the access to education only kicks in after 10 days of removal. But those 10 days that you could be out of school are pretty significant. In fact, majorly significant for any student. So a short-term suspension that's less than 10 days, you don't have that access to education guaranteed by the law. We'd like to see that change. We know our truancy laws say that if you have an unexcused absence in a month, up to just 2 or 3 in a short period of time, the school is actually required to take action to say, hey, you're not in school. Whoa, we need to interrupt, right? Like, it's so problematic to not be in school for a few days, and yet we allow the school districts to use up to 10 days of school to put someone out for behavior without providing them with any education. So we want to keep moving forward on that note. And I think everyone else has commented already, and we just really support, I think, what the policies and the changes in the law are reflecting, which is that taking kids out of school and disrupting their learning isn't really aligned with improving behavior or improving outcomes for kids, right? If we don't address the underlying problems and what's going on with a young person, then we're really not going to improve the outcome in the long run. And simple removal from the school setting doesn't really do anything to address what's actually happening for a young person. So we're super excited. The last thing that we'd want to say about it, and I appreciate the comments that the school districts have made regarding it, is we have a hope as the discipline policies get implemented and as school districts really start thinking differently about school discipline, is that that we think more about discipline or about student behavior as an intervention needing to address the gaps in both adult skill development and student skill development. And one of the sort of systemic problems with how school discipline policy has developed over time is it lists, a long array of behavior that is inappropriate by students and then indicates a punishment for that. But our clients tell us that there is a lot of inappropriate behavior happening by adults. And we'd really like to see the skill gap, the cultural competency gap, the ability to understand where kids are coming from, the training and the support, that wraparound support, right? Teachers can't do it all by themselves. Really, we want to work with the school systems and with the whole structure to make sure that the right supports are available, so that there's a deficit for us in sort of the adult skill development because kids aren't ready. Our adults aren't ready to meet the needs of the kids to come into the classroom. The support that might be necessary isn't always there in every school district. And so we really want to work more on that gap. That's kind of a place we're hoping to go. So thank you.
That's great. Thanks so much, Karen. And so what I'm going to go and do, and for me, trust me, as the moderator, it's like walking and chewing gum at the same time. I'm going to go through and unmute all of our panelists, and then we are going to have a discussion as a panel with some questions that we have. And then anyone can jump in from the panel. So we'll bring John, Aaron, Wyeth, Josh, and Karen back. And it might be a bit like a virtual mosh pit, because I think one thing that we're realizing here is that we're not all in the same room. That's the joy of a webinar. So Rose and I are in Seattle We have Josh in Olympia, I think, unless he's doing a road tour. Aaron and Wyeth are at Seattle headquarters. John's out somewhere in the countryside in Curlew and Republic. And Karen is probably down near the pizza place that has the chickens in Seattle, right? So down at her office. So we're all going to kind of jump in. There is no rudeness here. We have some questions for the panelists, and anyone can weigh in on those. I just want to let attendees know that if you have a question that's not answered today, we're going to provide the contact information on the next slide for the panelists. You can reach out to them directly, or you can email us at oeoinfo@gov.wa.gov. So that's our main information line. So I'll just ask the panelists first. I really appreciate all of your different perspectives on these issues, and really just the momentum that's building statewide to see these changes in practice, how it builds on existing practices. So what advice would you give to families in working with schools, particularly in building a productive relationship or navigating these difficult conversations around discipline and re-engagement?
Well, this is Karen. I'm happy to jump in first just to say we talk with families all the time about how to approach conversations with schools. And a couple of things we like to say is first to really empower and remind families how that they are experts, that they're coming to the table as experts, and to not forget that they're experts in their own children. And we really encourage them to hold on to that, because sometimes families go to meet with school staff and feel incompetent or feel less than equal because they're not educated, they're not running the school, they're not, they don't have necessarily those credentials after their name. But when it comes to their own child, they are experts, and in a meaningful and constructive way, if they can share what they know about their own child and their own child's needs, I think that's really important. And so that's one thing we say.
That's great. Anyone from the school perspective, what advice do you give to staff on building that relationship, or what would you share with parents who might be listening today? Or will
Carrie, this is John Glenwinkle. I would agree with that. I would also encourage parents to find an advocate, to come as much as they can to the school in a calm fashion. And I know for many of our parents, one of the things that I think I've experienced is that sometimes their experience at school wasn't the greatest in the world either. And so it's incumbent upon school administrators, school officials, to recognize that this is a tense and difficult and conflict-filled situation. If the parents can come calm, and if they don't get the answer that they believe they deserve, I would call the ombudsman's office, and I would find someone else who could help get that message across.
Thanks for that plug, John. So does anyone else want to weigh in on this question before we move on to the next one?
Hi, go ahead.
I actually wanted to comment in response to something Karen said unrelated to this question. So if whoever wanted to answer this question first goes, and then maybe I can follow up with something.
Yeah, that sounds great.
This was Aaron with Seattle Schools. I echo everything that everyone said. I think it's important that if families and have questions about our policies and procedures, and it's complicated, and systems are difficult to navigate. And so if there's questions, if there's things that they have unanswered, to please share that and be vulnerable and let us know, so we can help make sure that they understand exactly what's going on. Sometimes it's miscommunication, and it just is a matter of a conversation to help get everyone on the same page, which I think can be very helpful. And we understand this is it's a difficult time whenever we're talking about school discipline. So just to encourage families to please ask, and we love to give as much information as possible and make sure people understand exactly what's going on. And also to the point of being able to be the expert of their own child. I think if there are things going on that would be helpful in us kind of understanding the whole child framework, that really is important for us if they're comfortable in sharing, because that helps us figure out what a plan is to help support the student best as possible. If they're returning to school or if they're returning to the classroom, if we know and are aware of other things, as Wyatt had mentioned earlier, going on, we can help support that. And that will help everybody, in the long run, student be more successful at school and more learning happening and more time in class. So to please, again, if comfortable, to be able to share that.
Josh, I suspect that you're going to want to clarify alternative education services. And now would be a great time to do that. Did we guess right?
So what I wanted to clarify, and by the way, I'm in Tacoma, not Olympia, because I didn't want to try to do this in the busy office with all the noise around there. So the provision of educational services, and we at OSPI, because the law has stated that the provision of educational services this is applies whether the disciplinary action is discretionary or non-discretionary. In other words, any disciplinary action is subject to the bar on suspending the provision of educational services. So whether the suspension is short-term or long-term, educational services may not be suspended. And that's pretty clear in the law. So I just wanted to clarify that. I don't know if Karen was talking about short-term as it was or moving forward, but any questions related to that I can certainly respond to.
Josh, can you remind us, it sounds like in the bulletin that OSPI put out, you started to put out some ideas about what those alternative services might look like when you're talking about a relatively short turnaround time. I don't know if this is a good time to expand on that just briefly, and then we can move into the next question.
Yeah, just real briefly. I mean, a lot of the questions, some of us at OSPI have been going out and presenting and receiving feedback on the implications of this part of the law. And so the question often arises, well, what does the provision of educational services look like in a short-term suspension when you're talking about 1 to 3 days or something? Because the legislature in the bill specifically mentioned alternative high schools, one-on-one tutoring, and online learning as examples of an alternative setting. Now, is it really in the best interest of the student or even feasible to enroll them in an alternative high school for 1 or 3 days? I think you get the the idea that, in the rulemaking, we have to think about and consider coming up with language around what educational services may look like in a short term as opposed to a long-term scenario. But regardless of what the disciplinary action is, it's pretty clear in the law that you can't suspend the provision of educational services.
Thank you.
Thanks. And yeah, that's going to look different across the state in terms of ideas and resources and partnering that might occur to make this happen. So I'm wondering, and we could start with administrators on this question, and also Josh, because I know that you've been going around as well and giving a presentation, making sure that everyone's aware of this ESD by ESD. What kinds of conversations do you expect to have, or have you been having with teachers around these changes in discipline rules?
So this is John Glenwinkle again, and unfortunately, the conversations we've been having are not very positive conversations. And this truly is a paradigm shift in the way that we think, because what this is being interpreted as in some venues is a loss of power on behalf of the teacher to exert their authority to remove a child. And that's not ubiquitous, but that is the disturbing piece of that I've been hearing. When we do reiterate the points that were made earlier, that look, sending a child away only results in a child being further behind and more angry when they return, we can make some headway there. But this is a bit of a tough sell in some of the more conservative areas of the state in which I am currently operating.
I imagine. So, would anyone else like to weigh in on this question of what that on-the-ground PD or news dissemination has looked like, what your plans are for that in the coming months?
This is Wyatt with Seattle Public Schools, and we're we're already into 50 schools this year. We now have expanded our team to I would say at least 10 people, both within our special education department and our coordinated behavioral health, that are out there providing direct professional development, and also the side-by-side work, which is the critical part that I think John was mentioning. Just, like, it's really difficult to shift the culture. It is a paradigm shift for many staff to think about this. There's many staff members that were trained up 30 plus years ago, and that way, that skill set and mindset can really be a shift for some folks. And so coming alongside them, demonstrating it, taking some of the edge off of the situation in those trainings is really critical as you're already into a heated situation. And I'd say that's part of the big shift. We also just literally have a professional development that we're leading with all the principals here this afternoon, is just about why it's so important to come together, have a team at the school level, looking at your data, your early warning indicators for especially social emotional learning and behavior, and to really think about what do you need to change within your own system to be in better response to the needs. And those things can shift over time, and that's where the power of a team that's diverse, coming together, looking at the data, and discussing strategies and implementing those strategies to see what sticks and what works to fill the needs of each and every child that you have to serve. And so I don't know, I think that's just where the power, that's where we're at in Seattle. It's really just, it's really getting on the ground, supporting them, and then schools lifting off in this work as independent as they can be. And so we're differentiating our supports to schools to ensure all 99 schools actually are implementing, having these teams to look at the data and to be responsive to it so they can get way ahead of it where need be.
It's great to build in those systems of support for professionals. So before we move on to the next question, I just wanted to check in and see if Josh or Karen had anything to add.
There's one thing I would like to insert here, I think, in conversations with student or teachers and staff. That there's some language in the discipline changes around the need to have culturally competent, culturally informed, re-engagement meetings, and there's some other changes in the statute in other areas around cultural competency training. And something I'd like to say about that in regards to, even this in the school discipline context is, there are some hard sort of shifts being asked, for the school staff, to make. Shifts in the way of thinking about discipline and about how to respond to behavior. And alongside that is a hard question, I think, being asked, or a hard request being asked to really learn more and think and shift about the cultural differences between people who work in schools and the people who are consumers of the public education system. Certainly, there's a very significant racial difference between the people that teach and the people that are the students and families. And a really quick, short example that I feel like just says so much about the need for cultural competency on many levels. But I had a family whose parent explained that the teacher and the parent was not a native English speaker, so English was a language they were learning. The teacher had described their student as struggling. And the parent heard that as a compliment, that the idea of struggle sounded good, like good, they're rolling up their sleeves, they're really getting to work, like I'm glad my student is struggling, like it seemed like good work. And just that little thing, it was such a good example of how then it took a long time to kind of clarify that disconnect, right? And the teacher's sort of sitting there thinking, I'm telling this parent that the student's having a hard time and needs help, and the parent's, not even responding, like not getting in and helping the student, right? Like, because the parent heard that as a compliment, like, wow, this is great. I'm so glad my student is up there struggling to learn their math. Good for them. So it's just so easy That was one around just language and understanding terminology, but there's a lot of other reasons why cultural kind of mistakes, small and large, get made. And so I would be also asking the staff and teachers to really be thinking about how different their culture might be from the culture of the people that they're teaching and their families, and just really own it and be aware of it. It's just a consciousness that I think you have to live with all the time if you want to teach in public education.
I think that was certainly part of the discussions of the EOGOEC, the Opportunity Gap Committee that came together and really worked on getting this bill and the various provisions through. And the idea that you don't arrive at a state of cultural competence, for example, but we're always increasing our cultural responsiveness, but that we need professional learning communities for that. We need supports that are ongoing. And so I guess I'd open up the floor to anyone else too on the call. How has that cultural competence, responsiveness piece been part of the conversation or the trainings you've been doing? You all mentioned it in different ways, but if there's, a sort of a shining example for you or a place where you feel like you've made some progress, you're pretty proud of this work, of this shift, feel free to share it. I hear thoughts being made. Somehow we muted John. I'm going to unmute John because he might be talking to himself out there. Okay, John's back on.
No, I muted it because my chair was squeaking.
Okay, thanks for confessing. So you might be self-serving and I might be unmuting you all. Okay, would anyone like to weigh in on that piece?
Carrie, this is Erin again with Seattle. I just wanted to share something that this is more kind of with the work I do with administrators, but when we get calls from administrators about some discipline or behavioral concerns, we do a pretty lengthy kind of consultation or coaching, if you will, where we kind of have some drawn out conversations about the student, again, looking at the whole child. And part of that becomes the conversation about kind of cultural awareness, like of ourselves and understanding the student and understanding dynamics, maybe out like within the community as well. So I know that that's something that we layer in our work with administrators, and just that's a question. There's probably about 20 questions I go through when I talk with administrators when we're thinking about discipline in any way, and that's something that does come up in the conversation. So we're starting to get into that. I know we have equity teams in our schools as well doing some work, here in Seattle.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. So what tools do you all expect that you'll be able to use to help youth stay engaged with learning if they're removed from school for an extended period of time? Thinking about the exceptions here, it's an issue that presents in our office too, and it can be a struggle to keep youth engaged and have the appropriate supports, assuming that they're out for a longer period of time than a few days.
In my region, that's a challenge, and so while we do offer some alternative learning settings, while we do offer tutoring, while we offer a variety of programs, one of our biggest challenges is if we ever have a student in this situation, how do we get that student to the learning environment? And we're fortunate right now that we've been able to expend some resources to keep our kids who are having the most struggles engaged in school. But if it gets to the point that we can't have them there because of their safety or the safety of other students, and we have to come up with an alternative, our biggest barrier in these regions, and I think it's safe to say in much of Eastern Washington, will be how to get students transported to a place where we can provide that ongoing quality educational system.
Great.
For support.
Yeah, we see huge regional differences in our office as well. Others that might want to weigh in on that, on what they're putting in motion or what they have had in motion to deal with that issue of students who are out of school for a longer period of time. Okay. Well,
I would just add that, I don't have a good solution per se, but I would highlight the need, and maybe OSPI can do some thinking thinking about this from a systemic perspective, but the need to really figure out how to make sure that the middle school age range is well connected. Certainly, in places, bigger places with more population, many school districts have alternative places for high school students to go. That doesn't obviously happen everywhere, but it is more common to find a physical location for high school students to attend outside of their traditional high school. It's very difficult to find that kind of resource for middle school students. And the data we look at around school discipline in the regions where we do work indicate that sixth grade is one of the highest uses of removal from school, that age range. And of course, that's a time of great transition, sixth grade, and problems that maybe were not as evident in elementary school can really be highlighted when you transition into that middle school shift, where some of the learning expectations are more on the student, multiple teachers in a larger setting, and so that's, I think, an area that really will need some attention, is how to have meaningful, continuous educational services for the middle school age range. And for us at Team Child, that conundrum for us leads to wanting to have more meaningful conversations about how to simply not use exclusion. That we need to figure out how to support kids within the home school where they belong, because creating other opportunities, other places for them to be physically is very challenging and has its own set of costs and impacts.
Great, thank you for sharing that. When you think about those critical points of transition for students. So we're going to wrap up today. I wanted to give you all the contact information for our presenters, our panelists. The complete set of slides, which was human error on my part, sorry, Wyeth and Aaron, will be up on our website as well without the blip in the middle, but technology is always exciting. I just really want it's an hour-long webinar, but you can tell the amount of preparation that went into joining the conversation today and the many times we fretted together over what a first webinar would look like and how the technology would play out. Before wrapping up, I just wanted to give everyone an opportunity to share any upcoming events or news that they wanted to depart with. And so let's start with John. Is there anything that you'd like to share, something that's coming up or something that you're excited about on the horizon?
No, I just want to thank you for doing this, and I do want to emphasize that the Ombuds Office is a great resource. I don't want to overwhelm you, but I've used it and recommended it many times, and always with good results. So I thank you for your work.
Thanks, John. And yeah, we're here to support students and families as they navigate conflicts with schools, but we're also a confidential resource if educators want to call with questions. Sometimes we're just act as a connector to direct you to the right person within the district who can tell you more about what's going on or to give you ideas of what other districts are doing, say in an area like this. And we want to hear your good news as well. We just reinvigorated our newsletter. So Aaron and Wyeth?
Yeah, I'll jump in here again. Wyeth with Seattle Public Schools, and I haven't done this for a long time. I have to say that I think it just to really change how we do things. I think it's just going to need more collaboration. I don't know if that's what you're looking for here, Carrie, but I know you and I have discussed this. I just think this is a greater outreach, and I feel that some things are just leaning back on schools in some ways that just it's not realistic. I know when I talk to some schools, they really are challenging. I think Karen just hit on something. I know Karen and I have worked together before, and I just say that middle school is an area that's a real struggle, but it's also what do? We don't want to send them somewhere else, but it's the community supports and. If we don't have that wraparound services and it's not really coordinated, it's still left with, even with the highest skill set, challenging behaviors, the best, the experts, still are challenged with some answers or solutions to individual, to student needs. And so I think there's some ways of how can we work together as an entire system, a community to think about those things. 'Cause I don't have magical answers, but I just think we can do better And that's Seattle Public Schools perspective, but within what resource environment that we have.
Those are real challenges, and I would just echo that everything that happens in our office, at least the way that we operate as an ombuds office, we can't get to positive outcomes without collaboration from schools. It takes other people at the team. We don't have a wand to make things happen, or to correct structural resource differences and inequalities. And so it really takes creativity from community partners, as Wyeth was saying, from other state agencies, really thinking about how do we do this together, because we know that if you start in middle school, that you're going to have some issues later on too, right? So that early introduction to the discipline system can have lasting effects, and it has lasting effects on educators too that we know, and we hear that again and again in stories of discipline, of educators wanting some other resources for that. Josh, Ose, we're almost at time, but I just want to give Josh and Karen 1 minute, and if you have to depart, we're just going to post this online.
Yeah, with the 1 minute, I would mention a couple things. OSPI, under the Learning Assistance Program, convenes a panel of experts every year since 2 years ago to update a behavior menu of best practices and strategies, which is available online, published online every year through OSPI's website, which includes a variety of resources related to discipline and behavior. The last update included restorative justice and trauma-informed education as new entries. And I think getting back to what Karen said, the most important thing perhaps in this legislation is the further encouragement to look to alternative actions and not resorting to suspension and expulsion, which can increase the cost of providing educational services as well as have long-term societal costs and just don't serve the best interests of the students. So looking to alternative ways to address discipline and behavior, build school culture, and be more on the preventative end is one of the major parts that we're hoping will come out of this bill.
That's exciting. And Karen, take us out.
Yeah, thank you so much, and I appreciate what Wyatt said, because we do think you need a larger group of people helping to look at these problems and solve them. So we want to extend an invitation for people in South King County anyways that Team Child's participating in and hosting a discipline coalition that meets regularly, focused on a bigger kind of mission of interrupting the school to prison pipeline for students of color through multiracial and anti-racist organizing and advocacy strategies, but thinking about discipline in the context of how it impacts communities of color. And it's very much community-led and is filled with a lot of people who are parents and family members and very impacted by experiences of school discipline and other school to prison pipeline issues. But it's open, and people are interested and want to join. We are hopefully a group of people that are thinking a lot about this and will have ideas and bringing the community together to help advance the conversation. And you can get in touch with about the coalition through the Team Child's website.
I want to thank you all. Thanks so much. We really appreciate it. If anyone is listening right now and they want to share this webinar with friends, we'd appreciate it. It's going to be posted at our website, listed here, oeo.wa.gov, in the coming days. So thanks again for joining us, and thanks to our great panel today. Have a good morning.